I love to watch TV shows that I hate, or rather, I hate to watch TV shows that I love. I really try. Let me do that again.
Welcome back to Chat on TV Watchmen, the unofficial podcast companion piece to the hit HBO series Watchmen. I'm one of your hosts, Gene Lyons, and alongside me is my co-host, the King Bee.
King Bee Internacional!
And this is our final newsstand edition for Watchmen, where we look back on top listener emails and voicemail. This one will span everything that we couldn't get to last week, plus some more that came in toward the end. Everything is fair game for the entire season of Watchmen. And King B, this brings us back to where we started. And I found the copy of Watchmen that you gave me when we were kids and what you wrote on the front page. And it says, Gene, here's your first comic book. Read it often. Enjoy it forever. Think about being a hero. Buy me a new damn copy, asshead, the King Bee. So 20 years later, we finally get to cover this together, and it's been a fun journey. Thanks everyone who has listened and written in and called in on the voicemail line. We really appreciate it. And I look back at this grueling 9 weeks with a lot of fondness, and I'm so glad it's over.
I have no recollection of giving you that copy. I'd like to think I came up with something better than asshead, but you know what? I'll stand by it. You still haven't bought me a new copy, so asshead applies.
Yeah, I mean, we were teenagers. I spilled some nail polish remover on your graphic novel, and here we are.
What a journey.
And thanks for joining me just 2 days out from Christmas. I know things are really hectic with everyone's schedules, and so I appreciate you taking the time to record this together. And everyone for listening right now, I hope you're with your family and friends, or if you're alone, you're at least cozied up to a nice bottle of bourbon and listening to this over the holidays. Without further ado, let's get into the voicemails and emails for this week. And they are all over the place, spanning from favorite characters to how the show could have been done differently, and mostly assessments of the entire season. We'll start off with Tom from Chicago, who simply wrote about how Watchmen could improve. And he says there's really two things. One is the pace of the story. He says they fit into a single season enough to fill up 3 to 5 quality seasons. I so wish they explored the themes and characters more. We went from a slightly alternative reality for most of the season to full blown out superhero action for the last couple of episodes. I think they did not use the genre and story particularly effectively as an allegory to explore interesting subjects and themes. Also, we had zero insight into how African Americans felt on the world they live in and on how they felt about Redfordations and the 7th Cavalry. Instead, we only get to see the reactions of people associated with the establishment, aka the police. I would have also loved to better understand Judd's character and views. There seemed to be a lot of complexity there to look at, from his close relationship with Angela to his racial views as a, quote, white man in Oklahoma. And that comes from Tom in Chicago. And Tom, I hadn't really thought about it until you reframed the question. So we've been talking about whether there should have been a sequel, a season 2 to Watchmen, or if it's better left off as it is. No one had really brought up the question of should this season have been stretched out, right? So don't give us a whole new story arc. Don't give me a sequel, but rather take more time with the episodes that we had and stretch it out over the course of maybe 3 seasons. I could definitely see that. There was a lot to play with, but at the same time, it's like questioning the size of a canvas that an artist used, right? If somebody was painting a mural versus a miniature versus a portrait, it's what Lindelof wanted to do with the runway that he decided to use. And I think overall, I'm still very satisfied.
You know, he makes a lot of really strong points here. Don Johnson's performance is already so magnetic, and I think that it really lends itself to the notion that this is a really layered character that has a lot to explore. But at the same time, One of the oldest rules of entertainment is leave them wanting more. Yeah, maybe a longer season could have serviced a lot of these elements a lot better, but what elements would have suffered? I think this Ozymandias story, obviously I can't shut up about it, was my favorite part. But if you had stretched that out over 13 episodes or 15 episodes, I just don't think it would have been as strong as it was.
Thanks for your email, Tom. Next up, we have one from Nigel, who wants more Watchmen. He says, as a black man, a superpowered black female Angela walking around with no mask in a world with white supremacists opens up fascinating potential storylines. Can you imagine the worldwide white anxiety if the most powerful being on the planet was Sister Night? Given our nation's history, including Tulsa, that simultaneously makes Angela the most dangerous and vulnerable person on the planet. Like Dr. King, they would try to assassinate her. Watching Angela live as a hero to many, but with that constant danger while raising her kids, is fascinating and would be an incredible watch. Even more satisfying when we all know she made the choice for the power. John told her he would not pass along his power without someone consenting first, and for good reason, as it is an incredible burden. Lastly, Angela would need help or a team. Did any of you catch that bonding moment between Angela and Bian when the squid fell? Please, HBO, while we still have these incredible actors, do a small time jump for season 2 because we want more Watchmen. And that comes from Nigel.
You know, I know that representation is a big deal. And I think that it's fantastic that so many people really connected with this notion and these characters. One of my favorite movies that I saw this year was The Farewell. I had gone to see it by myself. I couldn't get anyone else to come see it with me. It's an entirely Asian cast. It's a culture I'm wholly unfamiliar with. It's a family dynamic that I never get to see. I understand how important it is that movies start to represent what the population actually looks like. And I found it to be really fresh, really refreshing and fascinating to watch. I'm going to counter all of that with the introduction of a godlike ability. Superman at times kind of got boring because there is just no challenge that can best him. The only weakness he has is that the people that are close to him are soft and mortal and vulnerable. When you have this person with godlike abilities who can't be touched, who maybe has got a chip on her shoulder for valid historical reasons, you've really got to wonder, where's the real challenge going to be? And it would come down to those who are close to her. You've got this person who can do anything, surrounded by people who can't do anything. And after a while, that story's going to get stale. So I think it would be a challenge to give you more Watchmen. I just don't see how much meat there is left on that bone. But that's just me.
And speaking of Superman, King B, listener Andy wrote in with a comic book deep cut. He says, I know the episode where we were introduced to the Clarks. There were a lot of comparisons to Superman and little Easter eggs they hid throughout. One that stood out to me the most that I cannot seem to remember anyone bringing up on the show, the identity that Dr. Manhattan takes is Kal, or short for Calvin, where in DC Comics, Calvin Ellis is the name of the Superman of Earth 23, who is African-American, that was created back during Grant Morrison's Final Crisis. I thought that was another neat little nod to Superman that a casual viewer may not have known.
Look at Andy coming in with the deep cuts from the old DC comic books. Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's a really good grab. I don't know if it was intentional, but makes a lot of sense. For those of you that don't know, Superman, Clark Kent, his Kryptonian name was Kal-El. So the Kal prefix is pretty common throughout Superman mythos.
And King B, you pointed out a few episodes back the comic book run, the 2-book run of Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow. And listener Chris wrote in to add a little bit to that conversation. One thing that we did not point out in that was that Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow was also written by Alan Moore in 1986, who wrote The Watchmen. So the fact that you drew that parallel actually makes a lot of sense, considering it was the same author. So great grab, Chris, and great grab, Andy. Next up, we have one from Brendan, writing in about the egg. And just so you guys know, we got a ton of email about Angela and the egg. We got some voicemail as well. We did cover it in the last newsstand. Didn't want to beat a dead horse, but all these emails will be shown in their entirety at shatontv.com. If you go to the Watchmen section and then the newsstand, a service provided generously by our Shat the Movies co-host Big D. So go check those out. Again, some of these might be truncated as well to save time. So it's all there, but lots and lots of discussions. So if you're interested in that discussion about Angela and the egg, do check out our website, shatontv.com. So this email from Brendan says, for me, watching Watchmen explores the nature of humanity and what does it mean to be human through legacy, through masks, through trauma, through race, etc. When humanity is left to their own thoughts and devices, are they strong enough to resist the pitfalls or do they chase the golden egg? I believe Lindelof and his team made the connection and continue to highlight the fallibility of humanity and succumbing to temptation. Just like the allegory explored in Ozymandias' arc, the Garden of Eden that is Europa was ultimately corrupted by humanity's existence. Angela, whilst being in the presence of a god and knowing what trials and tribulations confront her by consuming the egg, shows the viewer that humanity, when given the option, will succumb to temptation. So the idea here, King B, is Brendan is saying that there are these parallels with Ozymandias and Angela regarding temptation. And it's something we didn't really explore earlier, which is not, did she do it for love? Did she do it to experience what it was to be Dr. Manhattan? Did she do it for power, to save the world, to protect those people closest to her? But rather, just strictly temptation, right? And I can totally understand it's a basic motivation. It's like when they asked Bill Clinton, why he cheated on his wife, and his response was, "'Cause I could." And it sounds like a cop-out, but that shit's real. That is just the reality of people. If you set an egg on my desk and you're like, hey, infinite power is in that egg, and I know that it's going to ruin my life and ruin my grip on reality and make me indifferent to the plight of all the people around me, how am I going to resist it? It's sitting right there.
I would give you bonus points because I never even considered it would ruin my life. I already have eaten the egg.
Thanks, Brendan, for your email. Next up, we have one from Gary Hicks. He's writing in about autism. He says, I have an actually, and that's that ASD, autism spectrum disorder, is categorically not a disease. It is a neurological developmental difference from what would be regarded as neurotypical. Broadly speaking, it is a development neurological wiring difference in the way that ASD people process sensory input and logical thought processes. It isn't wrong, bad, or something that may be cured. Any proposed cure would require a radical rewiring of the brain and thus would irreparably change who I am, and almost certainly terminal as well. I have, as all ASD people have, the full range of possible human emotions. Our reactions to emotions in others will almost always be thought of as weird. This is because a huge amount of emotional information is transmitted via the eyes, and ASD people will mostly not be aware of this as it doesn't register with us. Thus, we tend to be known for avoiding eye contact and thus considered by neurotypical society to be untrustworthy or deceitful. As an example of this, my wife and I can rapidly descend into arguments because I simply do not understand why she is annoyed or upset. It isn't because I don't care. It's because I'm incapable of picking up on the subconscious cues that neurotypical people don't even know they are processing. I can do this, pick up on those cues, but it is horrifically mentally tiring as I need to consciously work through and work out, in most cases, guess what my wife is thinking and feeling. We've been together for 11 years and I still get that wrong more than I get it right. Such is life. Merry Christmas and a very happy New Year to all of you and your families and significant others. And I truly look forward to listening to all your future podcast work. And oh yes, I agree with the lady who wrote in, Dr. Manhattan is certainly on the spectrum, almost certainly a high functioning autistic. Take it easy, guys. Gary Hicks. And so what Gary's writing in about is a response to a letter written into the newsstand about the possibility of Dr. Manhattan being autistic, or at least being on the spectrum, and pointing out that this is not a disease to be cured, but rather just a different way of processing things, which I think really speaks to Dr. Manhattan. Now, we've had other people write in and comment on YouTube and on Twitter that they don't see this idea of Dr. Manhattan being on the spectrum. I honestly, and I think Raj said the same, they don't know enough about autism to really make a statement on it. But you do definitely see how differences in the way Dr. Manhattan processes information cause stress in his relationships. And so when you're watching a movie watching a TV show, reading a book, a lot of times you have a metaphor or a closely related situation, but it's finding that sympathy or empathy. And I find that sci-fi and fantasy and comic books are really, really good at exercising that channel to understanding.
You know what, Gary, buddy of mine, I got to tell you, I never understand why women are mad at me either. So I totally get where you're feeling, and I sympathize. You're all right in my book.
Thanks, Gary, for writing in. Next up, we have one from Michael McLaughlin, who writes in, Sup, Shat Squad. Random thought. Rorschach died for nothing. Why does Dr. Manhattan kill him when he can see the future and know inevitably that the squid secret will come out? Matter of fact, there possibly isn't a 7th Cavalry without a Rorschach squid incident to rally behind. Either way, Dr. Manhattan is a dick, and I agree he could have done way better. Love your podcast. I've sampled several others, and you are by far my favorite. You have a fan in me, and I look forward to your future endeavors. Kind regards, Michael McLaughlin in New York.
So what Michael here is referring to is in the graphic novel version of Watchmen, at the very end of the story, Rorschach confronts Dr. Manhattan and says, listen, you know who I am. You know how I am. I have to bring the truth to the people. Dr. Manhattan disagrees. He says, no, this will undo everything. Then all those people have died for nothing. And Rorschach challenges him. Rorschach also knows the same, but he's so driven and committed to his ideals that he forces Manhattan's hand, and Manhattan has to kill him. It could be argued that with all the temporal jim jamming going on, that Dr. Manhattan in that moment and place wasn't able to see downstream time speaking wise. So he didn't know that all of it would come out eventually. And I would argue that the 7th Cavalry absolutely would exist without a Rorschach. They just wouldn't have that particular journey or mask or thing to rally around. They'd have found some other dumb fucking thing and got all worked up about that.
If you guys haven't seen the Watchmen movie, a lot of people pan it or say it isn't true to the graphic novel, or that Schneider kind of missed the mark on it. Jackie Earle Haley, who plays Rorschach, this scene toward the end of the movie, love or hate the movie, it's fucking gold. I get goosebumps thinking about how good this guy was in the movie. Perfectly cast as Rorschach and an amazing performance. As for Dr. Manhattan, also remember that although he sees time as a flat disk, because he sees time as kind of existing in all times at once, it doesn't mean he can change his actions. So he still goes through life reacting as he would presented all the facts at that time. So it's like he can't change the course of his behavior. He acts as Dr. Manhattan would act. So he's still John Osterman. He would still do what John Osterman would do at that time, but he can't use his knowledge of the future to change the actions of the present. That's not how he works.
Kind of a tough distinction to really wrap our minds around.
And you look at the past when he acted in Vietnam, and he was killing rebels or the North Vietnamese, and you're like, why would he do that? He's massacring people. He knows that Vietnam's going to become a state of the United States. He knows that he's killing people, might be on the wrong side of history, whatever. That's all said with hindsight. And for him, he has to react as he would at that time. He wanted to help his country. He wanted to be a hero. He wanted to do the right thing. So it's a really hard thing to wrap your head around. Listener John Lish wrote in with another attempt to explain it better than I did. He says, I had a thought prompted by the analogies that Gene used, the CB radio and 2D animation, when I started to think about the notion of nirvana. Part of the criticism of the nirvana concept is that in achieving the state, you are essentially a drop of water entering the ocean, and that consciousness is considerably larger than you. The argument against this is that the critics get the notion back to front. It's the ocean entering the drop of water. The ocean entering the droplet feels like a reasonable analogy with how Dr. Manhattan experiences time at the point of his creation. If humans experience time linearly, like a river flowing from its source to its destination, then we can only conceive of time as the points we contribute to it. We add water to the river through our actions and experiences, and we observe the river of time flowing and our interactions with it making up our memories of the past and dreams of the future. Dr. Manhattan became the river, the totality of its flow from source to destination. He can both observe and experience all of his interactions with time, but he can never escape them. This feels tragic as he will never have the capacity to dream of the future or enjoy the memories that allow us to build stories about ourselves. It is truly alien despite having those human impulses for love in particular. He cannot be a storyteller. I wouldn't want to experience that. And that comes from John Lish. You would think being a god would have no serious drawbacks, right? And not in the classical sense. Like usually you would think, oh, there's some major drawback, some catch that most comic book, heroes have. In this case, it's like, nope, the very fact of being a god ruins the human experience for a person. And it's so beautifully counterbalanced, what the fuck is the point of having all the power in the universe? Like, what is the point? And it's a weird question to ask yourself, because when you stop and think about it, you're like, it renders power useless, which is just a fascinating concept to me and one of my favorite things about this series. All right, next up, we have one from Wendy writing in about Manhattan panties. She says, I think leaving Yahya Abdul-Mateen in the role of Dr. Manhattan rather than switching back to the actor that met with Angela in the bar was a good choice. It was another way of making Cyclops confront their racism, and probably more to the point, for the audience to confront their own prejudices about who should play a blue man. I still have your souvenirs from House on the Rock here. I'll get around to sending them to you someday. Anxiously awaiting my King B mug, Wendy, aka Shy Wendy on Twitter.
Would you call them Manhatties or Manhattanties?
I think they're Manhanties.
Panhanties?
I could go with that. By the way, a lot of inside baseball here. So Wendy is referring to her King B mug, which is the King Bee Adventure Club mug that she purchased from our shop, shatontv.com/shop, where you can go and get all of your stuff with the discount code SHAT20, which gives you 20% off. Also, her reference to House on the Rock is for those of you who didn't listen to our massively successful American Gods podcast. House on the Rock is a location in American Gods, and she went and got us some souvenirs from the House on the Rock. Very, very sweet of you, Wendy, to shop the shop with your King Bee mug and get us some stuff from the House on the Rock. I'm very excited to get my hands on those goodies. As for Yahya Abdul-Mateen playing Dr. Manhattan, I believe that was him in the bar as well. He was just wearing the mask and you never see his face. And then they used a voice modulator to change his voice slightly. But your point still stands, which I find fascinating, I hadn't thought about, is if they had switched John Osterman as he appears in that synthetic lithium cage to a white man, say like a Billy Crudup Dr. Manhattan or an animated Dr. Manhattan, it would be a very different impact. The fact that Yahya Abdul-Mateen has to be confronted there, Cyclops sees that this is a black man inside of a cage. There's a lot of history and a lot of connotation there. And it actually makes sense then why they would have him nude as well. He's stripped of everything. To him, it doesn't matter, but to them, it is an embarrassment, right? To them, it is degrading him down to the point of being just a caged like an animal. And it brings up a lot of legacy with racism, with slavery, and with the power structure in the United States. So very great observation. And a lot of people felt uncomfortable with this scene, with the way Yahya Abdul-Mateen appeared. And I think that might have even been my initial reaction. And you got to really get down to the guts of why that is. And I think this is an excellent dissection of that scene.
Plus, it certainly wasn't cold on that set, I'll tell you that.
Wow. All right. Next up, we have one from Juan in Key West. And this one's really squarely at you, King B. He says, Juan in Key West, Florida. Love the podcast. I've been around since season 6 of Game of Thrones. My first time emailing. You guys, stop complaining about two-dimensional characters. In 9 episodes, there's not a lot of time for storytelling and character development. I was in Chicago last weekend. At lunch, I overheard some geeky guys talking about Watchmen. One of them said, I didn't watch the movie or read the graphic novel. I'm planning on binge watching the whole show. So later, I interrupted them and highly suggested that they listen to Shat on TV podcast. Question. What's the freaking difference between comic and graphic novel? Asking for a friend.
All right. Well, Juan, thanks for writing in. I'll break this down. Comic books are typically your monthly periodicals. They're 23 to 32 pages of a serialized story. when you take a bunch of comic books, typically they're written in 3 to 4 issue story arcs. When you take those 3 to 4 issue story arcs and you collect them all into one volume, you get what's considered in the industry, they call it a trade paperback. Okay. And that's just a collection of a run of a comic book, a monthly serialized comic book. Now, every now and then they'll come out with a story that hadn't been serialized monthly. It's its own standalone story, and it's usually published in that larger volume. And those are considered a graphic novel. It's a singular narrative that often wasn't broken up into a monthly format, and it's presented to you all at once in one package. That's a graphic novel. Now, really, all these terms are pretty interchangeable. Trade paperback is something that not many people know or use. That's kind of the old comic heads know about trade paperbacks. Graphic novels are typically what's marketed in big box stores like your Barnes and Noble and things like that. And a lot of other types like manga and things like that come as graphic novels, as a sort of self-contained tale. But ultimately, they all fall under the realm of the comic book umbrella.
That was a great explanation, King B.
Cool kids call them funny books.
Also, Juan, I'd be careful who you call geeky guys, because if you interrupt somebody else's conversation to tell them about a podcast, sorry, buddy, you're one of us. You are a geeky guy. Thanks for writing in, Juan. That moves us on to our voicemail, and we have more voicemail than usual this week. So thanks everybody who did call in. Makes my life a lot easier when you just read it yourself. The first one comes from Abby in Orange County, and she's talking about how Dr. Manhattan could have done more.
Hi, guys. This is Abby calling from Orange County, California about Watchmen. I just wanted to thank you all so much for your podcast. Watchmen was new for me, so your podcast was just crucial for me to understand what was going on. I love the series. I love Damon Lindelof. So I just wanted to thank you all. One comment I had about the finale was everyone's talking about Angela the egg, the powers from Dr. Manhattan. Of course she's going to eat the egg. Of course she's going to have his powers. But I think what's really interesting is that no one's really talked about the comment that Will Reeves had at the end. Basically, he's saying this guy has all of these powers. Yeah, he's a good man, a good person, but couldn't he have done more? And I think the answer resoundingly is yes. And I think that's what frustrated me throughout the whole series, just even hearing about Dr. Manhattan, but then halfway in between, or kind of around season, I guess, episode 3 or 4, I went and watched the 2009 movie, which was really helpful to kind of fill in gaps for me with the characters. But even in that movie, Dr. Manhattan bothered me. I mean, I just felt like this man has the opportunity to do so much good. And I was always frustrated with that. And so I think Will Reeves' comment is key here, because I think if you look at Angela's face, I think she agrees with him. And I think what she's probably thinking to herself is, yeah, he could have done better, and so can I. So I think she absolutely ate that egg and wants those powers to do good or to do more for humanity. At least that's the way I took it. Again, you guys, you're awesome. I can't wait for Westworld, and have a great day. Take care. Bye.
Abby, you're awesome. You know what? I think we're all on the same page. Manhattan could have done more, but then again, maybe not. Like we discussed earlier in this podcast, it's possible that Osterman suffered or dealt with, that high functioning autism. Maybe he just didn't understand the level of suffering that some people felt, and he didn't put it together that he could have done more. Maybe there is a level of a lack of creativity in him where he just doesn't think to look. And again, his powers don't show him the ability to change time. He feels that he is sort of stuck in this preordained trajectory that he's in. So again, I think there's just a gap in that person and how this power was applied to them. That could he have done more? Yes, in the sense that he did not take as much action as others would, but maybe he couldn't because he just has those limitations.
Another way to look at it is you had these Minutemen, you had the Watchmen, you had these heroes that emerged throughout the history of this tale. And most of them didn't have superpowers. In fact, all of them didn't have superpowers except for Dr. Manhattan. But they had the moral fortitude, the intestinal fortitude, the guts to go out there, whether it was driven by anger, hatred, or just pure sadism, whatever it was. They went out there, they took a stand, they fought. Dr. Manhattan, on the other hand, he was just a scientist. He was a guy who, as a result of chance, ended up becoming the most powerful being. But had he not had that accident, had he not been in that intrinsic field chamber, had he not been blown to bits and reassembled, this guy would have just gone on being a scientist. So in a sense, his guts are not a hero's guts, right? That's not what he is. And so although his sense of time is different, he made decisions at each time based on what he was feeling or experiencing. So remember, when he leaves Earth because he's feeling guilt over what he thinks is cancer that he caused, and this is referring back to the graphic novel and the film, when he bails on people, when he loses his humanity, that's all stuff that he's doing. He's making choices. He can be frustrated. He can be emotionally manipulated. So let's not, completely absolve him of anything. And if you take somebody like an Angela, who has been fighting all this time with just her fists and her wits, yeah, it's reasonable to think that she might behave a little bit differently. So Abby, I think you're on the right track, and it's a question that's left up to everybody. It's one of those conversations that'll continue on for quite some time. Is, could Manhattan have done more? Should he have done more? So great observation. Next up, we have another voicemail about Dr. Manhattan, about whether we could have had a different Dr. Manhattan.
Hey guys, big fan of y'all's podcast on Watchmen. I know y'all do a great job talking about it. I know y'all have heard that before, so I'll just tell you what I thought maybe be interesting to talk about, which I picked up on the final episode. When he's in that box, he seems to kind of be, when they teleport Mr. Manhattan into that box, he seems to have a really hard time knowing where he is in the present. And I know throughout Dr. Manhattan's history, that's kind of been his thing. He's never really been in the present, which has always been a big problem for his relationships. So basically what I was going to say is maybe since he lives every moment in the same time, maybe throughout this whole series, he's actually been living in that box as well. The same way he's been being torn apart when he became Dr. Manhattan, he's also living in that box at the same time. And maybe that has affected his life in a sense, like that's why he's been so kind of aloof and out of it. Because when he was in the box, I didn't really think he was super out of character. Maybe it was enhanced a little bit, like with the talking and stuff. But when he's talking to Angela, I mean, he's talking to her, like he's not having trouble communicating with her. So basically, that was the one thing I wanted to address, that maybe that explains why he was so aloof. And also, if that's true, the next step would have to be if Angela does in fact inherit his powers and she doesn't have that experience, or anybody that in the future inherits Dr. Manhattan's powers in their life journey, is it possible that they could be a very, very different Dr. Manhattan, if that makes sense? Because we always say, like, if someone got their powers, where they would instantly become like Dr. Manhattan and see everything, all the time, and become like aloof and bored or whatever. But since he was in that box, he was in that box the whole time. So if someone never had that experience, maybe they could actually use his powers and not be kind of discombobulated the way he seemed to be throughout his entire character arc. Because since he's living every moment at the same time, he was in that box. Anyway, just a thought. Like I said, maybe the next Dr. Manhattan, if there is one, may not have that experience and may be capable of being much more present and utilize their powers in different ways. So maybe it wasn't his fault he couldn't do more, because he was always in that box. Anyway, love the show. See ya.
So the idea here is that Dr. Manhattan, we've understood the way he views time as the result of him being able to exist in more dimensions than we do, right? So the fourth dimension of time to him isn't the same as it is for a normal human. He experiences differently. The idea here with this voicemail is that maybe it's a result of that synthetic lithium box that makes him, throughout his existence, kind of that idea of that retrocausality, that this one incident happening in 2019 is actually affecting his grip on past, present, and future throughout his life, right? So as Dr. Manhattan is kind of existing at all these times, he might be able to make better sense of it had he not had the experience. I don't know if I agree with this idea, but it is an interesting take on it. Rather than Dr. Manhattan's concept of time being dictated by natural laws, it's actually affected by human intervention.
Okay, so initially I really wanted to just dismiss this email. I was like, yeah, whatever, he's in a box, who gives a shit? But as I really think about it, and I think about how you just responded, we always talk about how he views time, and that is a very singular sensory notion, as if he's just seeing these things. But he's also having conversations. He's also feeling physical sensations. There's so much going on. And in different adventures here and there, Dr. Manhattan's always alluded to, I can't see this portion of this time, or I'm unable to perceive what's going on. It's darkness. Again, we're assuming darkness in its plainest sense, a visual sense. But to a being that is able to experience all things at once, imagine the fucking vast white noise. We assume darkness is just an absence and vacuum of all things. But what if it's more of a cacophony of all things? When he's in that box and he's clearly sort of unstuck in time and he's having conversations that don't take place there or with Angela, there's a really subtle and layered, strong performance, because you see sort of a fearful befuddlement, but only in the tiniest amount, because he is sort of detached from, emotions as we feel them. But at the same time, he's really trying to work through what's happening. It's a sensation that is uncommon and unnew to him. We are only taking it in through our very human senses. But for a person who's perceptive on a level that he is, it's got to be a nightmare. And the more I think about it, the more I think just having this giant experience of white noise static, which is how I would imagine it to seem, like imagine that's always just going off just behind you and to the left. It's going to be a huge distraction, and you could never really focus on whatever was right in front of you. You're making a lot of sense, man. I think you got me converted.
And now for a voicemail that asks the question, did we get too much Dr. Manhattan? We have longtime listener and contributor Ash Schlafly calling in with her take on John Osterman's presence in the HBO show.
Hey y'all, Ashley Schlafly here. We're having internet issues at the university today, so I thought I would record this to get some thoughts in about the final episode. As I said on Twitter, I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. In truth, I was kind of left feeling pretty meh about it. And I wanted to kind of talk about why. So, many of us, including some of you, we were really immediately enthralled by the idea of a show based in the world of comics, but that was taking on issues well outside of the comic book universe. And it was a show that, came out of the gate, and it was talking about and shoving issues of race and inequality and white supremacy and more in our faces in this really open, honest, and sometimes arguably ghoulish way, which proved to be really effective storytelling. And I'm not going to recap all those moments here, but I'll just say that episode 6 was the culmination of the groundwork laid in the episodes before it, and it gave us a beautifully tragic point of view experience of a world lived by many, including the character of Hooded Justice. But this ending, though, really the last 3 episodes, it kind of seemed to abandon all the work and the beauty the episodes before it had laid. Instead, we were left to kind of ask ourselves if the quote-unquote right party had won. And while the 7th Cavalry, a 2D villain, as you so aptly pointed out, was laid to waste, I was left feeling pretty numb at their removal at the end of what is really a questionable supremacy if they were so easily taken out of the storyline. And I guess the issue here for me is that a show that began so incredibly complex in its approach to issues of race and legacy, that they abandoned such complexity for something that much lesser shows do and the Marvel movies made famous. It ended with a stark division between right and wrong among its characters, with them being punished or rewarded accordingly. I hate the concept of one right and one wrong, one good and one bad. I personally think right and wrong are pejorative, that they're problematic terms, as most binary subsets are. There's just too much gray in the in-between, in the nuances of life, of race, of any socially constructed tragedy. And this show totally gave up on that. They talk so much about worthy adversaries in this episode, but truly the most worthy adversary for the show to take on was inequality inequality and racism. And the legacy they tried to build addressing that was left to be typical, mundane, and incomplete. And I think Dr. Manhattan's introduction was the issue. The show had enough of a world created without this literal godlike presence of a character like Manhattan. He sucks up all the narrative space, and they simply didn't have enough time this season to truly explore his arch, his use, or his purpose. And the love story between he and Angela, it was forced. It meant nothing, or at least it made me feel nothing. And that sucks. They chose to spend their time on some love story and instead misuse the most interesting thing about Manhattan's character, which is his ability to experience time in a continual arc rather than a linear progression. They wasted it on the Angela love story when instead it could have been a fascinating lens to explore the racial inequalities the show had spent so much time cultivating. You know, Manhattan is able to see things happening now and then and beyond. And legacies, especially the legacies racial inequalities leave, persist beyond ourselves. They exist in the past, influence our future. They are pervasive, and someone like Manhattan could have seen those impacts more than anyone. Instead, though, we were given a send-off, you know, this last montage of love, a solitary tear, clean ending, wrapped up with a bow. And I just personally can't be satisfied by that. There are too many missed opportunities. Too many smarts began and abandoned. And in closing, I know we were given this cliffhanger, but the biggest review I can give you about this episode for me is that when she put her foot on the water and the black screen came up, I didn't care what the answer was. Ambivalence is not the way I wanted to end this show, especially one like Potential like this. Because truly, whether she walks on water or not, whether she got Dr. Manhattan's powers or not, if those powers are not used to push the narrative, to push the ideas, to explore these themes, then the show and Dr. Manhattan are rendered to nothing more than a good-looking dude with a huge blue dick that now will be a morally ambiguous, beautiful woman with what I assume will be and hope will be a normal-sized blue vagina. And who cares? I don't. And I hate that. I have enjoyed your coverage, though, and thank you for it. I look forward to exploring more shows and movies with you in the future now that this one has come to a close. And thanks for all you do. Happy holidays.
You know, Ashley, as always, makes some very well put and very strong points. I would challenge listeners to really think about it in this fashion. Maybe this show isn't really about race relations. A racially tense America that has been through a significant different time than we have is the setting for this show. But ultimately, this story isn't about that. This story is about legacies, old and new. And it just so happens that it takes place in a very racially charged time and place. Now, it's easy to create a very racially charged time and place as a setting because we're kind of living in it. But they take the challenge of creating a different sort of environment. The same struggle, but from a vastly different timetable. Ultimately, yeah, this show doesn't explore all those things, but we're not watching Do the Right Thing. This is not a show about that. It just happens to be the backdrop. What do you think, Gene?
I think Ashley presents a fascinating phrase in her voicemail, which is that Dr. Manhattan being introduced this late in the story and in this fully baked story, like the story is already there. When he shows up, as she says, he sucks up the narrative space. And that's absolutely right. How many times have we seen a show, I think Westworld's a good example, doing fine with the ideas that it already presented? It's given us a lot to think about. And then you throw one more thing in there. And I remember when this show started, you and I were in that camp of saying, we don't need to see Manhattan in this story. Lindelof's playground, where he does best, is actually on human interaction and, you know, just normal people going through some extraordinary circumstances. So what do we see here? For 7 episodes, that's what we're getting. And then what happens? Manhattan shows up. And what does Lindelof have to do to effectively storytell about Manhattan? Put him in a human situation. Like his answer to it is actually making him basically human. Putting him inside of Calais Bar, you know, wiping his memory of being Dr. Manhattan so that he can actually behave like a normal or relatively normal human being. And that's who Lindelof is. So on the flip side, though, I would say to Ashley that look at what Lindelof does so strongly. Look at The Leftovers, look at Lost. His bread and butter, his ideal situation is when he's talking about human interactions, and it's his right to tell this story in his way. So maybe he doesn't know enough about time or isn't as interested in time and the way Dr. Manhattan would perceive time. He did a serviceable job of expressing that, but he really wants to focus on human interaction. Maybe love is a theme that he wanted to explore. Maybe relationships are a theme he wanted to explore. Legacy, reckoning, all that stuff. King B, to answer your take on the story that he was trying to tell, though, he has been adamant, and this is one of the drawbacks, I think, of having an official podcast for a show, is Lindelof has said time and time again, this show is squarely about race, it's about reckoning, it's about legacy, and those are the topics. He never at any point said this show is about love. He didn't say the show was about romance or relationships or any of that stuff, but I don't think he can help himself. That's what he does. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, that's who he is as an executive producer. That's who he is as a writer. You paint with the palette that you're given in the style that you're most adept at doing. And we wouldn't ask a rapper to sing a song, and we wouldn't ask a singer to rap, right? It's like, you don't have to be able to do everything all at once. I think that, the show overall is good. I will take heed of Ashley saying she was disappointed by anything, because this is a woman who thinks her things through.
Sure.
And those are some incredibly strong points.
I guess ultimately it's a piece of art, and we all take something differently from it. If it is a show about race, I mean, God, don't scream at me for saying this, internet, but my question is, what is it telling me about race? I know what I've picked up from it. And I guess I saw a different story. I recognize the issues, but I see them more as a backdrop. Kind of like those old J.R. Tolkien novels where it's about some short dudes and some hairy dudes and some swords and stuff, but the guy still spends 3 chapters talking about a tree. There was a lot of setting and a ton of world building, but ultimately this show was about our main characters and not larger themes. That's what I took out of it.
Thanks, Ashley, so much for listening over the years and contributing. Also, guys, if you like Ashley's stuff, remember, she does have a podcast coming out very, very soon in 2020. It's called No Need to Argue, and she's doing it with her husband, Tom. Really looking forward to that podcast, so go ahead and check it out. You can follow her at No Need Pod and look forward to that show coming up in 2020. Next up, we have one from Jake from Vermont, who's calling in about why people listen.
Hey guys, Jake from Vermont here. I've been listening to the Watchmen podcast all season. In the last talk you guys did, you talked about kind of why people listen, and I think the main reason is people kind of get a sense of community with the show. I think having you guys there as someone to talk about different aspects, break it down. It's almost as if you don't have that person that is in your life who also watches the show, I think that being able to listen to other people talk about it and express their different love for the show or their different ideas is kind of a cool thing. So I appreciate everything you guys do, and keep up the good work. Have a good Christmas.
Thanks, Jake, so much for calling in. And King B and I have talked about this. Rod just talked about, what it is people want from the podcast. And this is actually a discussion we have behind the scenes as well, as how much of a mix should we put into this? Like, how much should we devote to tinfoil or reflectitine? How much should we spend on explaining what people just saw? How much should we offer our own opinion and judgment on the show? And we're always kind of tweaking that formula. But the most important thing for us is to make sure that we're a switchboard that brings everybody together who listens to the podcast and watches the TV show or the movie that we're covering. And as an example of that, I think about people who write in like Vasily, like John Lish, Ash Schlafly, Thiago, people who write in regularly, Gillian, and help us find our way through these shows in a way that we couldn't do on our own. And then in addition, when we get people like Raymond writing in or Kislina, who can give us perspectives on something that we cannot personally understand 100%. So it gives us a little bit of a window into that world. Most podcasts that are 3 white dudes talking on microphones. And again, like, we fall into that category, I think. I mean, I think I fall into into the white zone.
I personally count as 2 white dudes.
Yeah. So when you look at it that way, we need the help of all these other walks of life, whether it be women, people of color, to kind of add to that conversation. And then even normal ass white dudes can offer a lot of insight into parts of the art that we're viewing that we might not understand. So I love this voicemail, Jake, and thanks for listening.
Every one of us kind of brings their own thing to these conversations too. I mean, Raj is fantastic at introducing rambling, loose connections to his own personal experience. I'm really great at telling you about Scoot McNairy's filmography history and how it might apply to the role that he's playing today. Everyone brings something new and unique to the conversation.
Thanks, Jake, for your voicemail. Next up, we have one from Scotty. And this one goes out to you, King B.
Hi, hello. I am a huge fan of Shat on TV's The Watchmen review podcast. I recently just finished your latest episode, the Instacast, and the deep dive. Actually, I'm lying. I haven't finished the deep dive. I was just very much emboldened by the Instacast, which was a great short kind of review on that final episode, which I thought every comment was reflecting my own confused conclusions at the end of it. It was at once like a great ending episode. It was also very open-ended. But anyway, I'm also here to announce that this is Scotty. I left a review calling out the King Bee, and I must rescind my negative tone because it was horribly wrong, and King Bee completely redeemed himself in the final few episodes, comprehensively reviewing the entire series. I might have been a little harsh on King Bee, but he broke my heart on episode 7 reviews whenever he just said, I can't do any more of these throwbacks. I thought the full production up until the end was just so brilliant, and then whenever I heard King B saying I can't do flashbacks anymore, it just broke my heart. And then I wrote a very scathingly toned review, but I left it open-ended, gave you guys 4 stars, which I think I need to change that to 5 stars because you guys called me out and kind of you brought up the worst and the best parts of my review, and I was like, damn, you guys really care.
Well, Scotty, thanks so much for calling in. We all gathered around your scathing review, and I got to tell you, you make a lot of sense in your review. Here's the thing. I'm going to be a polarizing figure, I think, in the realm of this podcast and how it relates to a lot of TV and media. I love to watch TV shows that I absolutely hate, and I've grown to hate watching the shows that I absolutely love, thanks to this podcast. I really try to challenge every viewer to be critical of what we're watching. It's easy to just fall over yourself claiming how fantastic everything is and how this thing is the best. I like to take a thing apart and really figure out why I feel the way that I do about a thing and how it relates to my experiences in my daily life. So there's going to be times when a story element comes up that I go, this doesn't sit well with me because I feel a narrative movement in this direction or that direction, or one element of this story really, really speaks to me. This other element really, really falls flat. And I don't pull punches when I talk about those things. I hold something to full account when I'm trying to give an analysis or share my thoughts and opinions. Those often rub people quite the wrong way. But I do appreciate you calling in. It's always tough to get a bad review, mostly because I have no way to retort or have a person expand. You clearly didn't have an issue expanding on your thoughts. I hope more people get an opportunity to take a look at that review because there are some real gems inside there.
Scotty, if it's okay with you, write into us at host@shatontv.com or call in to the voicemail line at 914-719-SHAT and let us know if it's okay if we post your review on the blog. I think it would make it a very nice addition to the newsstand. It's about essay length, so I think we could use it there.
Thanks again for calling.
And finally, we have a very special voicemail coming in through the true satellite line from the one and only Dr. Long Island.
Hello. I'm calling to speak up on the behalf of a group of Americans who have been majorly underrepresented in media lately, and that is people with an omnipresent experience of time. You may have heard of me. People call me Dr. Long Island, and my symbol is a helium atom. As an omnipresent being, it's nice to finally reach the point in my timeline where we're being depicted again on screen for the first time since Zack Snyder's movie. It's early December, and I'm watching episode 8 for the first time now, and I'm being blown away by how well Lindelof is demonstrating how an omnipresent being experiences events over time for an audience of regular humans to understand. Now it's next Thursday, and I'm listening to you guys play this comment back as I drive home from work. I don't like the sound of my own voice, so I feel embarrassment. Now my message is ending, and I'm realizing that I forgot to ask you the following question, so I will ask it now. Yes, this changes my timeline, but like the show and the comic, I won't go into how that works. Here's the question I never asked. It's last week, and I'm listening to the official HBO Watchmen companion podcast as Lindelof explains that his ultimate goal has always been to make something worthy of the name Watchmen. Before the finale, I was so curious to see how they were going to recreate a situation where moral ambiguity on a large scale was retroactively the entire point. Questions I was left with after finishing the novel would include, is killing 3 million people better than letting nuclear war unfold naturally? Who are the good guys and who are the bad guys? How do I even define good and bad for myself, and what goes into that process? In the finale of this show, however, I was struck by how tight the bow on this present was. If I had to sum up the finale in 3 words, they would be, good guys win. Yes, we were left with some moral snacks to munch on, but I was just shocked when Lady True was killed, or when Veidt was arrested. What am I supposed to feel after the main villains of this story up to that point, the leadership of Cyclops, are taken out by Lady True, not Will Reeves, and as a side note? I would have said the mixed morals regarding race would do the trick for me if they hadn't literally shown me how insignificant those players were to the larger story by vaporizing them in a CG laser blast like a shot out of the recent Justice League movie. This is not the tone I expect from a Watchmen property. But what do you guys think? Obviously the show was spectacular in its own ways, but I was left pondering what makes Watchmen, Watchmen. Is it smaller stories told retroactively through the perspective of different characters that come together to form a larger arc? Is it the dark and noir feeling mood and tone of the imagery? Is it the inclusion of an omnipresent being like myself? Or is it the waking up the final issue forced upon readers to ponder over the next 35 years and beyond that defines the Watchmen experience? If the way the ending forces you to reflect on your own views of right and wrong is as vital to Watchmen as I have always felt it is, what do you guys think? When all is said and done, does this show leave you feeling like its Blu-ray will belong next to the original copy of the graphic novel on your shelf? Now you guys are mentioning that we're running short on time for the podcast, so this is where I wrap up. Thank you for your time. I would say keep up the good work, but I'm listening to the next few years of your podcast right now, and it's all great work. I'm particularly fascinated by the conversation we are having around the end of Westworld Season 3. Can't wait for reality to catch up with this message. All the best, Dr. Long Island.
You know, I thought Dr. Long Island would sound a lot more like a sleepy drunk mom.
Right.
What a commitment.
If you had a list, a checkbox list, as Lindelof seemed to have, he said that they went through a couple different exercises in the writing room. And one of the things they did is they put up all the adjectives that they wanted to achieve with the show, like basically list all the adjectives that describe Watchmen, the graphic novel, and we should hit on all those points with the TV show. And I think that what Dr. Long Island's talking about here, that moral ambiguity, who's right and who's wrong, Watchmen did a fantastic job of that, really flipping comic books on their head, where typically there was a moral lesson. And here, either side could have been right? Killing 3 million people prevents thermonuclear holocaust. Is that worth it? And keeping the secret, is it right to kill somebody who is on your team in order to keep that secret, at least for some time? Those questions rise. I think part of it, though, is a real difference in the medium. It's something we haven't really talked about, is that Watchmen was done as comic books. Like, it was done as a series of 12 comic books. And anytime you switch mediums from, let's say, a comic book to a television show, certain different rules apply to TV, to making good TV. And you have to take that into account. No TV show will ever be as good at being a comic book as a comic book. And conversely, no comic book will ever be as good as being a TV show as a TV show. So it's a bit apples and oranges, but I do agree, Dr. Long Island, that I didn't have that same holy shit, mind blown feeling at the end of this series as I did when I first read Watchmen. And maybe Watchmen itself made it impossible to ever have that feeling again, because it was the first time we'd ever been exposed to anything like it.
And again, I would go back to the notions that the more adult themes and the more sort of divisive or thought-provoking elements of this story were really more of a setting than what ultimately revealed itself as the A-plot, which I guess was a basic crime-fighting story. You've really given me a lot to chew on.
And much in the way that the TV show brought humanity to Dr. Manhattan by having him inhabit the body of Cal Abar and go through everyday stuff like making waffles, taking care of kids. I love that Dr. Long Island is still, as this, omniscient, omnipotent being, still makes his daily drive to work, still has a couple of dogs. He's just keeping it real. He's a normal guy. And I'm glad that we could relate on that level, Dr. Long Island.
You don't think those are omnipotent dogs?
Space dogs.
Space dogs!
And on that note, literally, we will wrap up the final newsstand for The Watchmen Season 1, possibly for The Watchmen Forever. Thanks to everyone for joining us on this ride. It's been almost 3 months together. And just as a reminder, if you like what you hear, do us a big, big favor. If you haven't already, go to Shat the Movies, wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to Shat the Movies, where you can continue with us until our next TV show, which will most likely be Westworld Season 3. So go ahead and subscribe there. And if you go to shatontv.com, you can see all the TV shows we've done in the past. We've done True Detective, Taboo, American Gods, Game of Thrones, and of course, Westworld. So you can go and check those out. Get caught up if you haven't watched those shows before. Some people are doing rewatches and listening to us, which is both terrifying and flattering. So do that as well. And then, of course, shatthemovies.com, where you can see our entire movie catalog. We just released The Santa Claus. Next week, we'll be doing the Sylvester Stallone written Over the Top, which, if you haven't seen, is about as 80s as it gets. And a special thank you to everyone who has subscribed and downloaded our podcast. We hit over 186,000 downloads for Watchmen in just a matter of weeks, and have surpassed 6.1 million downloads for all of our podcasts combined. We couldn't have done it without your help. If you'd like to support us, you can go to shatontv.com/support. Or shop our store at shatontv.com/shop, where you can find lovely, lovely items, including King Bee Adventure Club's t-shirts and mugs, Super Gene Social Justice Warrior t-shirts, Big D t-shirts, and throwback Westworld stuff. You can check all of that out on the website, shatontv.com. That concludes this week's episode of Shat on TV Watchmen. Be sure to follow us on social media and share with a friend. We're on Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram at Shat on TV. On Facebook, just search for Shat on TV Podcast. The website is shatontv.com. Again, you can email us. It won't make it to another newsstand, but we'll read it and respond on the website at hosts@shatontv.com. We're everywhere fine podcasts can be found, including iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Pandora, Spotify, and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe, and there's still time to write a review. That helps the podcast grow. A lot of people discover us weeks, months, and years after a show is aired. So you writing those reviews is a great way to say thank you to us and a great way to help other people find the podcast. On behalf of my co-hosts, the King Bee and Roger Roper, I'm Gene Lyons, and we wish you happy holidays and a wonderful 2020. Thanks so much for listening.
Boom.